This is Mark McNeese, and you're listening to One Thing or Another, the interviews. Welcome, everybody, to One Thing or Another, an interview podcast. This is Mark McNeese, your host, with my special guest. They're all very special guests, but this week it is Marshall Thornton, an author, writer, multi-talented, multifaceted individual that I've known for a couple years. How are you, Marshall?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. Now, we had to postpone this a half hour or so because I live in the woods out here in rural New Jersey, and they started cutting down trees. I was explaining there's a beach infestation. It's beetles. They're not native to this country, but they got here somehow, and they're like killing all the beech trees. So they're cutting down thousands of them. It's kind of sad, but they started sawing just when I called you, and we waited a little bit, and we're back now. Where are you, by the way?
I'm in Upper Michigan, on the Pinky.
What are you near?
Traverse City.
Oh, okay. I know you go to Chicago. Do you drive there? Is it very far?
Oh, yeah, I drive to Chicago. It's about 6 hours, 7 hours.
Oh, wow. That's a long way to go, especially for like a book fair.
Oh, well.
Yeah, but you get your gas money back, I hope.
Oh, yeah. I still have a lot of friends there, too, so.
Well, and speaking of Chicago, that's where your Boystown series is set. So let's just jump right into that. First of all, I'd like to do the sort of Cliff Notes Marshall Thornton rundown so people get an idea of who you are and a little bit about your background, how you got from, birth to here, but, in pretty encapsulated. Let us, I was thinking earlier today I could call it the 411, but is that still a thing? Do people still use 411 for information? I don't know.
I think there's a website called 411, so.
I remember being able to call them and get information.
Yeah. Oh, they're still there.
Pre-internet.
Yeah, they're still there. I just don't think anyone uses them.
No, and they probably get charged if they do.
Yeah, I think so.
So what's the lowdown on Marshall?
Well, let's see. I've been writing since I was about 16 or 17, and I've written plays and tried TV and films, and along the way I got a Bachelor of Arts from Cal State Long Beach, and then an MFA in screenwriting from UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And I published my first novel 10 years ago.
Wow, it's been 10 years.
I know. So I've been sticking to fiction since then.
Time flies because I just happened to, I didn't even know why I looked at the publication date for the first one that I did, and it was 6 years ago. I'm like, Jesus. I mentioned that Boystown, that's your, I'm sure you want to be known for lots of things, but I think that was your first breakthrough in terms of a series that's very well known. You've been nominated for the Lambda Literary Award multiple times and won for that series once, I think. But can you just Chicago inspired it, and it's set in the 1980s. Can you just talk a little about the series? And I'm also curious to know if it's going to end or if this is something that you decide after each book if there's going to be another one.
Okay. Which do you want first? Should we talk about how it started? Or?
Yeah, well, you lived in Chicago, obviously, but.
Right. I lived in Chicago from 1980 to 1987. And when I went back to writing fiction around 2008, 2009, I published a little story with Queer Press, which is a little Christmas story. And I thought it would be interesting to do something like that, and decided to do a detective thing in Chicago. And honestly, at first it was a very kind of toss-off thing. And I was going to do them as short stories. And the publisher, gave me this date that was almost a year away. And I was like, oh, I want to do them sooner than that. And she said, well, if you put them together in a book, we can get them on the schedule sooner, because they had a glut of short stories at the time. And so I did. And the thing is, it's interesting because at first it really didn't do that well. And the first publisher almost dropped me after the third book, and I ended up leaving them anyway and moving to another publisher. And the series really did not take off until I left that publisher and started doing them on my own.
Right.
Once I got all the rights back to everything, then it really did take off. And that was about the time 7 came out, and then 7 won the Lambda. So I think that helped. And it's been really strong in the last few years. And for the future, I know that I'm going to do 2 more, and that's probably it.
Okay. All right. You by the way, is Nowak with, is it W or V? It's spelled with a W, but is it Nowak or Novak?
I think that depends on whether you're American or Polish. I think in American it's Nowak, but I imagine that a Pole would say Novak.
I bet they would.
So,
and now you've expanded. We're going to get to your newest one, which fits in with October, my favorite month. It's Halloween. I'll be putting this up around Halloween time, this podcast. But you've expanded into the Pinx videos, and that seems to have been quite successful. At least, at this, like you seem to have a golden touch, and I'm not saying that with any envy, because you're you, and you work really, really hard at what you do. And it's one of the things I admire most about you, because I don't really have the stamina, but you are, you're a working writer, and I also wanted to ask you a little bit about the realities of being a working writer. You like to work all the time. But you've expanded in the Pinx videos, and you also did Femme and Masc. And, how is that going for you? You want to just explore more genres, or keep writing series?
Well, let's see. This is my income. This is what I do for a living.
Right.
And that does mean certain things have to happen. I have to have at least 4 books a year.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do 5, 4 on my own and 1 with a publisher, so that I, using the publisher to expand my audience. And, that also means that they need to be 4 books that work.
Right.
And so, one of the things about writing a series is once you get it up and running, those books are pretty reliable. And so the Pinx books have done really well. I think they appeal to a lot of people who read the Boystown books, even though they're different in tone and structure.
And location. They're set in LA, where we both lived at one point.
Right. But they do have the commonality of being nostalgia books. Because since the Pinx books are set in the 90s, so people who lived in the 80s also lived in the 90s, and so they
hopefully
get the same kind of the same kind of enjoyment out of visiting the past. And so those are going well. And as soon as when I finish the Boystown books, I'm going to have to start another series, because I need at least 2 to stay afloat, and that also gives me the opportunity to take a few chances. When I was writing spec scripts, trying to get started as a screenwriter, I used to flip back and forth between comedy and thrillers and mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And I still really enjoy that. It's nice to take a break from the darkness and do something funny, but then I don't like to be funny all the time. So it's really enjoyable flipping back and forth, and I think that my audience has come to accept that. I have some fans who really prefer the romantic comedies, and others who really like the mysteries best. But a lot of people read them all. So.
Oh, is that a cowbell?
Oh, that's my email.
I was going to say, and I just totally lost my train of thought. So it is your income. I've known that for a while. You got to do 4 books a year. And Like, what does that mean in terms of a work schedule? Because it is a work schedule. It's both a writing schedule, but it's a work schedule. What kind of day is your typical work life?
I work a bit every day. Some days I work pretty much all day, and then other days I'm kind of bouncing out and back. I have a dog, and he gets me outside several times a day, and I know people, so I will take breaks. But it's start in the morning, get your butt in the chair, and give it a try.
7 days a week?
Usually, yeah. I have to kind of push to take a day off now and then. I really should take more days off, but it's like right now I know I have to get a book out in February. I don't know what it is, so I have to figure that out.
Well, I'm going to pepper you with some stuff here, because I have 2 books in process, but I'm more of like, okay, if it takes me a year and a half, it's okay, because I have I've always had a, quote, regular job. So I have had the luxury of saying, well, I'd like to get this done in a certain amount of time, but if it takes me a year, it's okay. Do you outline?
I'm kind of a half-assed outliner.
Yeah, me too.
I try to, and there's a point where I get bored with it and I start writing.
Yes, I do the same thing. It's like drudgery, and because I used to write plays, and that's very much about structure. Plays are all about structure. So I would have a much more of an outline with a play, but with the fiction, I get bored with it too. And it's like, okay, I've outlined like 4 chapters, and I just need to start writing them to get into that zone, that mental space of writing the story, as opposed to torturing myself over plot points.
Well, I mean, an outline, you're never going to present it to someone.
Right.
I think I'd pay a lot more attention to it if I was collaborating in some way, shape, or form. But, I don't need a really nice, pretty outline to start.
Do you know your ending when you start?
Well, usually I have a pretty strong idea. I will say I have written books where the murderer has changed 2 or 3 times at the end.
I like that, because that's like, for some reason I need to like at least have a really clear idea, even if it takes different paths. Like, how does this story end? And until I get some kind of idea of that, I get really, really stuck. Now, outline. Drafts. Do you do multiple drafts?
Once again, that depends on the project. I find that books all write themselves differently. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is gut at this point. Sometimes I know, I'm working on a book right now that I drafted last year, and I gave it to people to do notes for me, and I'm now trying to pull it together to send out to a publisher. But then on the other hand, like the Night Drop, the first Pinx book, it came out very quickly, and I said, you know what, I feel strong enough about it that I'm not going to do beta readers. And I went right to my editor, and I said, read this. If you have any thoughts about it should go to beta readers, just say so, and I will send it out. But I think it's strong enough. And she was like, oh, absolutely, it's great. And those books have been really easy and fun to write. And
I think that when you're when you've written as much as you have, and other authors, I try to leave myself out of this, but when you're skilled at something, you do have, it is not just gut, but it's also skill. And so if something's working or not. And I know there are, because we have lots of writer friends on Facebook, and some of them are like, they sort of outsource their plots, which I think is weird. I would never ever do that, other than to a few very trusted people. It's like, I'm not going to put on Facebook, how should I go with this story? I don't. But but you're skilled enough that it's okay. You could do a book in 2 drafts, or a draft and a polish. And trust that you've done the best you could. Proofreader, you have a proofreader?
Oh, I have several.
Okay.
that I've collected along the way. People volunteer. I mean, I can't pay anybody to do it, so they're nice enough. I mean, what has happened is people will be nice enough to send me notes and say, oh, I found these mistakes in your book, and that generally gets them asked.
So you get those too.
Yes, and I generally say, would you like to proofread my next book?
Right.
And I usually get a yes out of that. And so, I have several people that I've gone back to several times. And,
well, I like that because I need to. I think proofreading is really, really important, especially when you're self-published. At least some of what you do is, and of course, all of my stuff is self-published. But I learned early on that I got to have other people read this because you miss things. And I got an email yesterday from a woman. She really liked this Murder at the Pacey Parrot, but she had she said there were 2 typos in the book. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to redo the manuscript for 2 typos, but it's interesting, so it's helpful. But the last one, I was really annoyed because I pay her. She's proofread like 4 of my books, and she missed a bunch of stuff, man. I was so pissed. It's like,
Yeah, well, it's really hard. I try to use 2 or 3 people. And the challenge here, particularly when you're not paying someone or you're paying them very little, is that, they don't want to work on something they don't like.
Right.
So if you're reading something you like, it's very easy to miss things because you get involved with the plot and you get involved with the story. And so, I always find that my proofreaders miss a few things, and I don't get upset with them because they get carried along, and that's great.
Yeah. I mean, she did a really good job, and I really like her, and she was very meticulous in the beginning. I think this one was done through the mail because we moved, and yet, so I'm not going to hold it against her, but I'm not going to use her again.
The other thing too is, things like this, people get really critical when they know you're self-published, but I always find typos.
Oh, I do too.
In big publishers' books.
I read. I like Michael Connelly junk. I find typos in best-selling authors' books. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I just read Lethal White, and I think I found 2. Now it's an almost 700-page novel, and having done the process myself, I'm like, I'm not going to get upset about that or call anybody or make a mistake. But it seems that if people know you're self-published, 2 typos in a book is enough for people to say, "Oh, it's rife with mistakes."
Yes, and I know you've been trolled. I've been trolled too. But I was going to say, before we get on to Never Rest, which I do want to talk about, on the typo thing, I worked at Reuters for a long time, at Reuters News, and we had copy editors, and so many times now in the New York Times, for God's sake, I see typos, I see words left out, and a lot of this is these places. It's because they don't have copy editors anymore. Budget, they got rid of their copy editors, and I think it's a shame because it's one thing to find a typo on a, Huffington Post, but the New York Times, Washington Post, Anyways, I'm just putting that out there because that's when it annoys me. I can deal with it in a novel because I understand that.
Right.
But come on, man, you can get a copy editor to read this stuff. Anyways, I wanted to ask you about Never Rest, which I did notice, speaking of outside publishers. Is it Lethe or Lethe?
I think it's Lethe.
I think it's Lethe, too. Lethe Press. Put it out.
I've only seen it in print, so I don't know. But go ahead.
Well, Never Rest is your new one. Here's the description. 19-year-old Jake Margate has had terminal leukemia for 5 years and is ready to let go, but his mother has other ideas. She's found a rogue doctor pursuing radical treatments and takes her son to a remote institute. Ooh, cue the creepy music, where he does seem to get better at first. But then the treatment begins to fail in strange ways, just as Jake begins to fall for another of the test subjects, which I'm assuming is a man. Slowly he realizes he's been turned into something truly horrible. Anyways, just tell us about the book. Is this something that you had done before and picked up? Was it a new idea? How did it come about?
The way it came about, actually, when I was in film school, a friend of mine wrote a reanimation script that I really liked, and I gave her a lot of notes on it, and it sort of didn't go anywhere. And about 3 years ago, I asked her, I said, do you mind if I write a queer version, a queer take on a reanimation story? And she said, oh, no, go ahead. And, what I wrote is nothing like her script, but it does have some of the elements that really appealed to me in what she'd written. And so that's kind of how it started.
And when did you start writing it?
I think I had a draft in 2015.
Okay.
So, yeah, that took a couple of years. Interestingly, some of the books happen really fast, and then others just take several years. And this is one that took a few years to come about. It was tricky to get it going correctly because it sounds like a really depressing story. I don't. But then too, it's sort of young adult, and if you think about young adult, it's like, what are they about? It's like, Fault in My Stars, 2 dying kids. It's like all these apocalyptic things where everybody's dying left and right. It's like, it's not a very cheerful genre.
No, it sounds like a really interesting twist on that, really interesting take on that. And I'm so glad that it's coming out. It coincides with Halloween and my podcast.
Yes, and also there's going to be an excerpt on Lambda Literary around that time.
Oh, nice. Boy, you're everywhere. You also write for Screenwriting U magazine, I think.
I do.
Is that the right name? Yes, because I see those. I'm one of your subscribers.
Oh, good.
Now, anyways, it's this I'm just launching this podcast. I've done interviews over the years many times, but I wanted to get back to just doing interviews, me and a guest, and because I need things to keep me engaged and excited. I'm going to be 60 in 2 weeks. It's like, okay, what do I want to do now? What do I do not want to do now? And this is one of the things I really want to do because I love talking to people. I'm going to try a final question, at least with a couple guests, and see how it works. And what are you passionate about? Obviously, you have to be passionate about writing because you just couldn't do this. I've done writing for hire, and it bores the shit out of me. And I'm saying, I don't want to do any more of this particular kind of project because I'm not interested in it. It pays me, but I don't want to do it. What are you passionate about in your life?
My first impulse is also to say writing, but that is pretty hollow if it's, if you don't have anything within it. And I think, looking back at my books and what I've done in 25 books, I think I'm very passionate about history, particularly gay history and the history of people who, our history has been ignored and pushed to the side. And I think it's important to go back and reclaim whatever we can. I'm also very fascinated by the relationship between the macro world and the micro world. It's like, when I was a kid, I was walking around thinking that, whatever was going on in the world really didn't have much effect on me. Mm-hmm. But as I've grown older, it's like, what's going on in Washington is everything about what's happening in people's lives. And, you can't go anywhere without people talking about the events of the day. And I think it's really interesting to show those two things in relationship, particularly, the Boystown books have a lot to do with AIDS, and it was fascinating to think back to what people were saying and how people were reacting to the news, basically. Mm-hmm. And to see, what was happening in the news was also happening to people we knew. And I think that was certainly the first thing that really struck me in my life, that, what's happening in the world actually does have an effect right here in front of me. Mm-hmm. And I think, and certainly, then you begin to see the differences between what big movements, mean like nationally and what they mean on a very personal level, because there's a real difference, I think. And so that's something I keep coming back to over and over again in most of my books. Even when it seems like that's not what I'm writing about, it always ends up being, because even like Femme sort of came out of people on social media saying like no fats or femmes.
Yeah.
And thinking about what that really meant on a personal basis, and putting that conflict into two characters, and two nice characters, just to see what that really meant. And because those bigger things really do affect us on a very personal level.
They do, and we're living in a time where that's very true again.
Oh yeah,
big stuff out there, and it's yeah. But anyway, Marshall, thank you so much for being a guest, one of my early guests, and I'm looking forward to putting this out because I love talking to you. It was great. I think it's going to be interesting for people to listen to.
Hopefully.
Oh, definitely, absolutely will be. And I'm going to let you, because you're a full-time writer, I'm going to let you get back to writing.
Okay.
Just as they start the buzzsaws outside again, too. So that's good timing.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Marshall, and we'll stay in touch. I know that.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.